The sun rises over the city of Megiddo in the land of Canaan. A city better known by its Greek translation, Armageddon. Tension hangs like a pall over the city, a deep breath held in anticipation of what's to come. At your direction, your city has refused to send tribute to the new boy Pharaoh. There hasn't been a war for years, and the Egyptians have grown soft under their recently deceased queen. Now is the time for you and your people to be free. The attack is expected at any moment and will either come from the north of the city or the south. You stand with your southern forces, scanning the horizon for any sign of the army's approach. You hear horns in the distance. Are they attacking from the north? No, those horns are coming from the east. You turn just in time to see the enemy's army charging toward your forces from the east, a direction that shouldn't be possible. How did they get there without your scouts seeing them coming? Your denial lasts only moments as the Egyptian vanguard slams into your troops' flanks and your lines shatter under the assault. You watch in horror as the Egyptians slaughter your surprised men. You realize that the battle has been lost before it was even begun. And that's when you see him, this boy Pharaoh on a chariot, looking nothing like a boy at all. Welcome to Go Grounds. We invite you to sit back, relax, and hear the true tale of Egypt's undefeated God King. The city of Thebes. It's the beating heart of Egypt's new kingdom, and the seat of power for the Pharaoh and his family. A family that has a new member today. The royal wife and Pharaoh's half-sister, Queen Hatshepsut, has given birth to Pharaoh's first child, a baby girl named Neferure. And while he is happy to have a beautiful new baby, he had been hoping for a boy, an heir that could secure his legacy.
Worry not, my king. We are young. Our next child will surely be a son, and he shall bear your name, the name of our father.
The queen's assurances would prove to be a promise that she could not keep. As years pass without another child, Pharaoh grows impatient, and he takes a lesser wife named Deceit, and at least one part of the queen's promise would be kept. Pharaoh would have a son bearing his name, just not with Hatshepsut. And while the Pharaoh and Deceit were ecstatic with their new son, there was one member of this love triangle that was not. Hatshepsut was the daughter of Pharaoh, scion of a god, and she would not lose her station as royal wife to some lesser woman, not without a fight. 3 years pass with an uneasy tension between the two wives of Pharaoh, his royal wife and the mother of his son and heir. But this balance of power was about to shift dramatically and suddenly. A mysterious illness has claimed the life of the young Pharaoh at the tender age of 31. The reign of Thutmose II ended in 1479 BC, leaving the throne without a ruler. But an empire needs a leader, and someone would have to ascend to Pharaoh. And I bet you can see where this is going.
My dear sister, our king is dead. I mourn my brother, but as royal wife, I must put away my grief and do what is best for Egypt. My son is still too young to rule the empire, so I will bear that burden for him.
My son is Pharaoh, and he will rule, as is his birthright.
Of course he will. When he comes of age, I will gladly step down and welcome our king back. Until then, I will serve as regent in his name. For now, you and his highness will go to Karnak, where he may learn the ways of the gods from the priests there. You are dismissed.
Deceit had no choice. Hatshepsut was right. Thutmose was still too young to rule, and a lesser wife could not defy the will of the royal wife and a daughter of Pharaoh. So she would protect her son as best she could in the temple city of Karnak. The temple city of Karnak is across the Nile River from the city of Thebes. And while this isn't very far in terms of distance, it was greatly removed from the politics of the palace, and a very different lifestyle for the boy Pharaoh. The boy spent his days with the priests learning about the gods, Osiris and Isis, Anubis, and the practices of preparing the dead for their journey to the afterlife. And of course, about Amun-Ra, the patron of Thebes, creator god and god of the sun, who sails through the sky on a daily journey into the underworld and back, a story that would become a metaphor for Thutmose himself. A statue of Amun-Ra was kept at the temple and occasionally held aloft by the priests for processionals during the holidays and feasts associated with Thebes' patron deity. During the preparation for one such processional, there was an accident. The statue had toppled over, barely missing young Thutmose. The shocked priests breathed a sigh of relief that the young pharaoh wasn't killed. But some of the priests saw it as an omen of great import.
Why, it's as if Amun-Ra has bowed to our pharaoh, acknowledging him as one of the gods. Truly, Pharaoh Thutmose has the blessing of Amun.
Yes, young Thutmose was already building a name for himself among the priest class in Karnak, but his focus on religion and absence from palace politics would have their own consequences. It's been 7 years since young Thutmose went to Karnak, and the Queen Regent has been very, very busy, building alliances and creating the political connections necessary for her next audacious step.
All hail Hatshepsut, Pharaoh of Egypt and our living God.
The people have been too long without Pharaoh, so I have offered up myself to the gods, and they have accepted me as one of their own. Amun-Ra has named me Pharaoh to guide his people into his great glory.
And what of Pharaoh Thutmose? How can we have two pharaohs?
Thutmose is Pharaoh, but too young to rule. He has learned the ways of the gods, and now he must learn the ways of war. He will go to live with the army and be trained by Egypt's great generals.
No, you can't. He is too young to fight with the army.
A pharaoh must be strong. Let him demonstrate his strength and bravery so that he will be ready for the throne when his time comes. You are dismissed.
The education of a pharaoh in the ways of war is something they all have to learn. But having them actually live with the army was not something that was common. It was a great way to ensure that young Thutmose became a great military leader and all-around kick-ass warrior. Or die young trying to. And Hatshepsut was okay with either outcome. So, young Thutmose began his internship with the army, living and training with the soldiers outside Thebes. Conditions were a bit harsher than with the priests, a fact that Hatshepsut was well aware of. But the boy king was determined. He would become a great warrior. He would make his father and mother proud. And he would not let Hatshepsut break him. He studied all of the fighting arts of Egypt, from striking to wrestling, the bow, the shield, and, of course, the bronze Khopesh sword. By the time Thutmose was 14, he had already built all the skills necessary to lead the armies of Egypt, and in doing so, began to build a name for himself. But Hatshepsut was also building a name for herself. She focused on the construction of new temples and the, well, let's call it refurbishment of old temples. These refurbishments essentially involved removing any mention of her brother and husband, Thutmose II, from all monuments recording his heroic deeds, and replacing it with her own name. And every new temple she built was replete with tales of her greatness and power, making the case for her own bloodline's claim to the throne of Pharaoh, a throne she had no intention of giving up to anyone. At the age of 15, Thutmose began his first campaign with the army. There weren't any major conflicts during Hatshepsut's reign, as she was more focused on her building projects. But as a result of this, some of the outlying areas of the empire had begun defying Egypt. One such place was Gezer in Palestine. The Palestinians at Gezer were balking at providing their tribute to Egypt, and so Hatshepsut sent the army there to correct their mistake. Thutmose led the army with help from his advisors. The campaign itself was relatively minor, and the armies of Egypt quickly brought the people of Gezer back into Egyptian control. The campaign was so successful that over the next few years Hatshepsut would send Thutmose on several others to deal with minor rebellions throughout the empire. Now, I'm not saying Hatshepsut was hoping he'd die on these campaigns, but they were dangerous, and he was young. And at each battle, Thutmose emerged victorious. By 1468 BC, Thutmose, now a 20-year-old warrior and leader of men, was summoned to Thebes' palace by Pharaoh Hatshepsut. Thutmose came before his aunt and stepmother, two pharaohs face to face. Now that he was a man and had proven himself in battle, it was finally time for Hatshepsut to keep her promise and step down. Thutmose waited in excited anticipation for the inevitable proclamation.
Pharaoh Thutmose, it gives me great joy to see what a powerful man you have become. Clearly your time with the army has honed you well. I believe you are finally ready for the throne. Unfortunately, Egypt is not. I have ruled our people for 17 years of prosperity and peace. But this very success has bred complacency. The army, which was once the most feared on earth, has grown weak without a major war to harden it.
And whose fault is that, Pharaoh? Perhaps if you were more concerned with growing the empire and less concerned with monuments to your own glory, our forces would still be razor sharp.
But it is dull and must be reforged. If I were to step down with a strong army, our enemies would use the chaos of transition to attack us. Would you have your time as Pharaoh marked with glory or failure? No. No, the army must be strong first. I can think of no warrior more capable than Pharaoh himself. So I appoint you leader of all of Egypt's armies. Strengthen them into a mighty weapon, and when this has been completed, then the throne will be yours.
Hatshepsut had always been good at telling half-truths. Much of the army had become complacent during the relative peace of her reign. But there was no doubt that she was also reluctant to give up power and was buying time. But Thutmose didn't have the political capital to unseat her. She still had too many allies in Thebes. So he decided he would focus on reforging the army into its former glory and wait for the right time to deal with his aunt. After 4 years and several more successful campaigns utilizing all the armed forces of Egypt, the army was finally as battle-ready as Thutmose could hope for. Given this, it seems suspiciously fortuitous timing that Hatshepsut, Pharaoh of Egypt, would die suddenly. No one is sure how she died, although there are many theories. Some believe it was cancer, others that she was poisoned by her lotion of all things, and yet others believe that it was Thutmose himself that killed her. But whatever the cause, the famed and successful female pharaoh lay dead. She was buried in the Valley of the Kings in a tomb she shared with her father, Thutmose I, a place of honor that didn't sit well with the third, as she had usurped his position for far too long, and there were also those persistent rumors that she had something to do with his father's death. But she was well thought of, and many of those in positions of power still loved her, so he let it pass, for now. Thutmose finally had his throne and a capable and ready army. point that he agreed with his aunt on wholeheartedly. You see, while he may not have liked Hatshepsut, he did respect her and her wisdom as pharaoh, and he knew she was right about something else. Their enemies would try to use this period of transition against him. And they did. Almost immediately upon hearing of Hatshepsut's death, the Canaanite king of the city of Megiddo met with city leaders. They knew that Egypt hadn't launched a major campaign in decades, and a young, inexperienced pharaoh would likely spend years getting a handle on basic rule, let alone worry about outlying areas. Additionally, the Mitanni Empire to the east was looking to undermine Egypt's power in the region, and were offering assistance to Canaanite states. They decided that this would be the perfect time to leverage Mitanni's help and break free from Egyptian rule. Which is exactly what Thutmose had been waiting for. He had the army ready to go within hours and began a forced march to Megiddo. His prior planning and foresight meant that the army made record time. A journey that would have taken the better part of a month was completed in just 11 days. During the journey, Thutmose would spend his evenings discussing strategy and logistics with his generals. The major decision that had to be made was how to array the army to best attack the city. Terrain, troop placement and formation, chariot use, all were up for discussion and adjustment. But the first decision was from which direction to approach the city. The first option was to march directly toward the city from the south. This was the shortest route and would be less tiring for the men, but it was also the most obvious route and would be more fortified. The second option was to circle around and attack from the north. This option would be the longest march, tiring the men, but would give them a larger area to better utilize their chariots, and would be less fortified and less likely to be defended. The final option was to take the Aruna mountain pass rather than go around the mountain. This option was not thought to be a good one because the pass was quite narrow, only allowing for 3 or 4 soldiers abreast, meaning that if they were caught there, their chariots would be useless and even a small force could effectively stop them in their tracks.
We will take the Aruna Mountain Pass into Megiddo. But Pharaoh, that pass is too narrow. If we get caught there, we will be finished. The south is a much better choice. If you do what your enemy expects, then you have already lost. We will make haste and be through the pass faster than they expect us to come up from the south and take them by surprise. And since you men seem to lack the courage necessary, I will lead the men through the pass myself.
And that's precisely what he did. They emerged from the pass to find no army waiting for them, no ambush, not even any scouts watching it. Clearly, Pharaoh had been right. It had come so quickly and through such an unlikely route that no one had bothered to keep an eye on this approach at all. Which is how the Egyptians were able to get the drop on the Canaanites at Megiddo. The confused Canaanites were routed so quickly and so thoroughly that the only way many of them could escape was to be pulled to safety on ropes over the city wall. This battle marked the beginning of Thutmose's winning ways as pharaoh, but would not be the last. He racked up more victories in Canaan and Syria, and he finally dealt with the Mitanni Empire. Once the north was pacified, he conquered the south as well. In all, Thutmose led 17 successful campaigns during his reign, greatly expanding the Egyptian empire, with not even one loss. But despite all his victories, and despite the fact that he had expanded the empire more than any other pharaoh that came before him, or since, there was still one adversary he felt he needed to beat. And that enemy had already showed him how he could win. So Thutmose began removing all mention of Hatshepsut and her great deeds from monuments all over Egypt, and replacing them with records of his victories and battles, of which there were many. The final part of Thutmose's defeat of his aunt and stepmother was the refurbishment of the tomb of his grandfather, Thutmose I. He added more tribute and idols to the tomb, and so he needed more space. And to get it, he moved her body out of the royal tomb so he could use her antechamber for additional storage. Since he needed to put her somewhere, he moved her mummy into a tomb meant for palace servants. where she shared a room with her old wet nurse. Because what good is being God King of Egypt if you can't be petty? Much like his patron Amun-Ra, Thutmose had descended from the glory of the palace into the underworld of temple and army life, only to reemerge into the sunshine of the most successful reign of any pharaoh in Egypt's long history. You see, I told you that metaphor would come back around. And now it was time for him to descend, once again, into the underworld at the age of 56. Thutmose III, blessed of Amun and God King of Egypt, was entombed in the Valley of the Kings, where he remains forever undefeated. If you enjoyed this content, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. I promise to get back to you as soon as I can.